Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Looks like we're all here and that the attendees are building up too. This is our special data specification webinar. Perhaps if one of my colleagues could share the deck, please.
You're muted, Gareth. But
okay, so we will go through a few quick intros, and I will just set some do some scene setting in terms of how what we can say on this meeting is affected by the pre-election period. People are still joining quite rapidly. I'm just going to let it go for a few minutes so I don't have to repeat too much of this. But on the call, we have got myself from DFT, we've got Harrod Booth Consulting, and we have PA Consulting, who are the external supplier for this contract. We are recording the webinar. Our intention is to make it available probably through a YouTube channel that we're just in the process of getting set up, so that can be our central place where these things are. Okay, I'm going to start the webinar properly now. We don't want to lose too much time. There's lots to get through to today. So welcome everyone. My name is John Cooper and I am the product owner on the Digital Traffic Regulation Orders D-TRO beta, which we are doing in 2024 with our external supplier PA Consulting. The call today is specifically about the data specification, which was launched in the last few weeks. And I will now introduce the start the introductions of the team on the call, starting with Gareth Tilley. Do you want to just say a couple of words?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, just a bit slow getting off mute there. My name's Gareth Tilley. I'm the Stakeholder Engagement Manager. As John said, I work for PA Consulting and we're the delivery partner for the D-TRO service. I don't know who wants to go next. John Harrod Booth, do you want to go next?
Yeah, good morning. I'm John Harrod Booth, independent consultant. I've been supporting DFT on D-TRO projects for a little while. My main focus is on the data model, and very happy to talk to you all today.
Good morning, I'm Lokesh and I'm one of the transport data leads at PA and also looking forward to talking to all of you too.
Hello, my name is Gabriel. I'm working with the API development and also working alongside with Lokesh. I'm from PA Consulting.
Okay, thanks everyone. As promised, I just wanted to set a few rules of the road as regards this webinar, given that we are in the pre-election period. We will be talking in terms about how we are progressing with the project, but any dates that we give out will have to be pitched in terms of they are our current plan of how we will proceed and would be subject to any change that any new ministers coming in might wish to impose on the project. So they are not definitive at this point. That said, we will carry on with the presentation. Just to note that there is a chat. We've gone with only a chat for this because it's easier to collate any questions in one place. Please ask any questions that you have in there. We will either answer them in the chat and we do have a programmed Q&A later. Perhaps we could just put the agenda up once more. I'm going to hand over at this point to, if we could just present that. just going to hand over quickly to Gareth, who's going to give a short run through on current program, and then we'll get started with the real content of the webinar on the data model. Over to you, Gareth.
With the caveat that you just had in mind, I just wanted to run through where we are with the program. It's still our plan to go into private beta at the end of August. Ahead of that, we'll be issuing the interface control documentation, and we'll be doing that in early July. Associated with that will be any testing approach we have with integration testing. So that will be jointly released together. And as I say, that the plan for that is early July, with a look to go into private beta at the end of August. I think that was the key headlines. I think that those dates haven't necessarily changed at all, but that is very much caveated, as you said, John.
Yeah.
So that was all I was going to say on the program.
All right. Thanks, Gareth. If you could just put the presentation onto presenting mode, so it's a bit bigger for everyone, that would be great. And then I'm going to hand over, I believe, to Lokesh for the first part of the session. If we could get it onto Lokesh's slide in present mode.
Sure. So whilst we're doing that, for those who joined late, I'm Lokesh, and I'm one of the transport data leads at PA, working on the data modeling side of the project. You'll also notice that I've got a stutter, so don't worry, it isn't your Wi-Fi buffering or anything like that. Okay, so let's get straight in then. So Gareth, if we can jump to the next slide, please.
I believe I'm sharing stuff, Lokesh. So is that the background to the data model?
It's
still
on the agenda.
Okay.
Let me try and do it
Let me
on
stop and reshare.
my side.
Yeah.
Here, is it that up now?
There we go.
Yep.
For people? Awesome. Okay, so to start with, it's key to note that data modeling by its nature is open to interpretation, and it can have multiple ways of doing it. For the D-TRO data model, over the different stages that has led us up to a beta, we've gone through multiple phases of user research to enable us to build a data model that can meet the needs of the wide-ranging user groups we've got involved. So a couple of key principles we've adopted then. First of all, keeping it as simple a structure as possible in light of the wide spectrum of traffic regulation concepts we've got, keeping it aligned to internationally recognized standards, and last of all, keeping it appropriate, relevant, open, and accessible in line with data modeling best practice. So it is worth also noting that this data model is the first effort to standardize the exchange of road traffic regs, lining with the Automated Vehicles Act, meaning that we've pretty much started from scratch here. So on to general concepts then, and whilst there are the various aspects of TROs that could have been subject to modeling, we have focused on modeling the legal order itself as made by the TRA to provide a firm technical basis to support encoding, exchanging, storage, and distribution of details of the legal contents of the TRO. And in terms of the design, so it covers all forms of orders, centers around key user needs, and supporting DFT policy objectives. And we've developed it as much of an extensible model as possible to support future extensions. Onto the D-TRO reporting points then. So the diagram shows the current expectation on reporting points needed from the D-TRO service across the different types, from the notice of proposal for permanent TROs to the notice of intention for a temp TRO by order, and then notices of making for experimental or special event orders, with then changes captured in the appropriate ways. And then this shows when in the life cycle of orders and notices that TRAs will be required to provide a D-TRO record to the service, with the service holding valid current submitted records, and those that have either recently expired, been replaced by amendments, or revoked. So in terms of the high level tour of the data model then, on the left you can see a summarized view of the model with more detail on each sub model in the user guide, which has been posted to the GitHub. In essence, though, the information has been organized as follows. So starting with the what, which defines the actual regulation mandated by the TRO, then onto the where specifying the location, then the when, the times and the days, the who, covered by what conditions apply, and the exemptions and exclusions, and then last of all, how much for the TROs that incur some form of payment, charging, or fees. So that wraps me up there, and I will hand over to John to talk over the key changes since Alpha.
Thank you, Lokesh. So I'm John Harrod. I'm going to talk you through these changes, and I'll get Lokesh to progress the slides as we do that. I realise that the audience we have today has people who have been involved in this process across a number of projects in some cases, and probably know this model equally as well as me. And there are some people who are probably completely fresh to it today, and therefore I'm going to keep this relatively high level. Of course, we're supplying documentation. So if you look in the chat, John has just mentioned about the GitHub resource that's available. Detailed documentation is available there. That may be moved across to a public GitHub in due course, but that's an ongoing discussion topic in DFT. Next slide, please. So the primary changes that have occurred between the data model version at the end of the Alpha project last year and the version we're dealing with that's been published recently really covers three different areas, and I'll talk to those briefly today. The first is inclusion of a records management provision. Obviously, we have to deal with updates and revocations and those sorts of things, so I'll cover that. The second is appeared on Lokesh's slides, which is an intention from DFT to seek, through secondary legislation, the ability to request the traffic regulating authorities to provide real-time update statuses on TTROs, and I'll explain the logic of that. And then the third is the ongoing discussion to do with location referencing. Next slide, please. So in terms of records management, I'll show you an example on the following slide, but very broadly, when a new TRO record comes into the central service in the future, and it'll come in from a traffic regulating authority or a digital service provider working on their behalf, we do some basic validation in the center. The basic validation is not checking the semantic content of that record, saying, well, it clearly is in the wrong place, or you formed the wrong sort of regulation, or surely this conflicts with that regulation. No, not at all. It's a very, very simple. That's just checking, you know, date fields to date fields, and you know, that sort of schema level validation, and one step above from that, that you don't supply end dates that are before start dates. So it's very, very basic level of validation. Once that record comes into the central service, it will be given by the central service a unique identifier, and it creates a new D-TRO record in the central service. When you wish to provide any amendment, and that amendment could be an amendment or a revocation, you as the supplier of the data need to set some metadata with respect to that. That then comes into the central service and goes validation, of course, and the changes that you've identified enable us to understand the relationship between the new part and what is already in the service. And for those who are more familiar with the model, the way we're structured at the moment is that we have the TRO at the top level, and in fact, a future evolution of the model may actually explicitly have that. But beneath that, we have sources and we have provisions. And broadly, provisions are a single regulation with a single set of condition criteria. So it's a parking restriction that applies maybe morning peak hours between 7 and 9. And it's given a bunch of different identifiable locations that we call regulated places. And you can make those changes and updates and revocations broadly at all three levels. So you can completely replace a TRO, you can replace a source, and you can replace any provisions. Again, the new TRO record coming in is given by the central service, a unique identifier. And it's really the data you supply that creates the linkage between what was, let's say, version 1 of a provision and then an update to it. Next slide, please. And that's really illustrated on slides like this. These are really takeaways, so I'm only going to talk about these at a very high level. But you can see, if you look at the black blobs, so top left, we're creating a new D-TRO record, and that's allocated a UUID by the central service. And any update to that on the right-hand side would then be allocated a new UUID by the service. So all of those records are distinct in terms of the central service. The detail, the metadata you supply, which is, if you look into the top left green box, you can see examples, is a reference that's given to your reference that's given to a source object within the system. And broadly, that can be any form of reference. It's whatever makes sense to you and your systems. But when we then take on board an update, you are supplying the same reference in that update, and we can recognize by the fact you say this is an amendment, and I'm pointing at any ref1, that we can then create the backwards linkage in the system. And bottom right illustrates that. So there will be an API that enables you to come and say, well, give me the versions of these things that are known to the system. I caveat that because the concept of the central system is not that it's an ever-increasing library that retains all history. It will be time limited. The time limitation is still under discussion, but maybe 90 days. And so records that have been expired and replaced or have expired naturally, TTRO that's expired and is over its allocated time and is more, and that occurred more than 90 days ago, will disappear from the central service. The next slide then provides an update in terms of the sort of provision level, which is the next level down. I'm not going to dwell on that. The principles are exactly the same. Next slide, please. Caveating everything to do with the fact that we're about to have a new government, whether it's the same government or a different colour, we don't know. It's certainly DFT's intention to seek to get secondary legislation supporting this central service. And an element of that is trying to get into that secondary legislation a requirement to do real-time reporting on the status of TTROs on the road network. And the ability to do so is critical. If you look at the TRO data in general, of course, we're looking at the legal record. We're not looking at the actuality on the ground. We're looking at the legal record in this service. It's a real challenge in terms of the possibility you could have a TTRO for 18 months duration that actually in real world terms is only there for a day. And so placing that obligation and trying to get that update information would be massively helpful to those data consumers downstream, the sat-nav companies, the mapping companies, journey planning companies and the like. I recognise that may, of course, be flexed when we get into that discussion around the secondary legislation, and we may have a different colour of government, and therefore, who knows whether that will be a requirement. It's worth saying, because it's come up in other conversations, it is a discussion ongoing in DFT about whether linkage can be created to Street Manager. That is under consideration, but it's not part of the beta MPV build at the moment. Next slide, please. Location referencing update. So any of you who have been involved in this discussion over some time will realise this is a really nutty discussion. At a high level, we need the service to ensure that the data that's being supplied into the middle, that's describing TROs, is data and is not just information. So many TROs at the moment are written in a human textual form. 5 meters from the corner of North Street on East Street, this starts to occur. It has to be done in the future in terms of spatial coordinates. That's the only way that we can sensibly achieve a data set which is going to be machine interpretable downstream by the consumers. That obviously has challenges, and it's an ongoing discussion, and I guess it will remain an ongoing discussion for some time. We will gain and learn as part of the beta for best practice. Your inputs are extremely valuable in this overall picture. And to try and stimulate those discussions, from time to time, DFT releases discussion papers. So if you are linked into the GitHub resource, you will have seen a post by me less than an hour ago that put the latest version of the discussion paper up onto the GitHub resource. Once I'm released from this webinar, I'll be preparing a synopsis of the discussions that we've had and how that might affect that thinking. So that will come shortly. We are, of course, seeking an approach which aims to try and reduce the barriers to getting this data into the central service. And so part of the significant change between the previous version of the discussion paper and the latest one was really trying to liberate the thinking and make it easier and more options available. And that it comes with some challenges. We've already had discussions. We've had at least 2 meetings that I've been involved in where we've been talking to stakeholders and the local authorities and software suppliers who are commenting on that, and very happy to take those comments. And we will try to flex as best we can to work with you to achieve the end of getting this data in a reasonably usable format. Next slide, please. Sorry for the slightly chaotic slide, but it sort of shows the thinking, which is that we're starting off trying to represent TROs which have real world deployment, which is very varied. We are talking about speed limits, which most people tend to think of linear. We're talking about gate light restrictions in terms of perhaps bus gates, perhaps no entries. We're talking about lengths of curb line. We're talking about band turning motions. We're talking about zones, and we have to be able to represent all of those within what we do. And in this version, we've extended it, because if you go back to the alpha, you could only supply things as points and polylines, no polygons. And we've gone down a route of saying, okay, we'll allow all 3. We have to also allow the fact that we may have some restrictions that are vertically separated. So if you think about the Westway in London, the A4 and M4 are coincident if you look at them from above, and we have to allow the possibility that they've got different regulations, and therefore we need a 3rd dimension in that picture. So we have to allow that possibility. Those of you who are technicians, which is everybody on this call, I hope, would recognise we have to make choices between how we code the data and the sort of coordinate referencing systems that we employ use of in that overall picture. And I'll come on to those in a moment. And we could try to force a particular way of doing things, and the comments we've had back from stakeholders in the past, from yourselves in the past, is, well, some of us work one way, some of us work another way, and it's very contextually dependent upon the sorts of TROs that you're trying to handle as well. So we're quite sensitive to trying to keep that as open as possible. We want to try to create linkage to external well-known references. In fact, as a government-delivered project, we are obliged to do so. So there needs to be some sort of outward linkage to the National Street Gazetteer. We discussed that in the most recent discussion, and I hear what was being said, and we will flex that. I'll come on to that in the next slide. And also in the previous version, in the Alpha project, actually we said nothing about the quality at all of the accuracy of any spatial data you supplied. And I caricature it because I've seen it operationally happen in real systems where if you don't have some sorts of checks and measures in place, somebody might just say, well, for all of the TROs I supply into this system, I'll just draw a nice little square in the middle of England somewhere, which doesn't represent anything real, but hey, I've supplied some spatial geometry, and it will be completely useless. And so there needs to be some sort of quality measure that makes sense. Next slide, please. Apologies for the densest slide you're going to see in this pack. So the key points of learning that came out of one of the discussions, which we had on the 4th of June, I'll run through briefly. There will be on the GitHub an update that's a bit more extensive in terms of this, but just to show the sort of flavour of listening and understanding. So the current specification says you can do points, polylines and polygons. The previous one only said points and polylines. So, okay, that's flexed. And there didn't seem to be any particular objection to that. But we recognise that certainly the different service providers tend to have different philosophies about how they deal with those things. There was a very strong comment made. So it would be really nice to be able to define common best practice about how you go about drawing. If it's a polygon that seems to be the preferred way of doing things, of where you draw polygons that represent things like curve line restrictions. We don't imply a specific preference for polyline versus polygon. However, a lot of feedback that said, don't ask us to define the geometry of the back of the footway or the edge of the highway boundary, because frankly, apart from TfL and some others, nobody knows it. And you'll create a burden which is going to be very costly on the local authority side, and avoid that. We may have to adapt the data model, and to be honest, I'm extremely open to having discussions around this. Is there some additional attribution that we need to include in that? That talks about, okay, I'm going to draw you a polyline or a polygon that's broadly following the curve line, maybe following OS data, but actually I'm going to give you attribution that says this does extend to the back of the footway. I'm not going to tell you where the back of the footway is, but I'll tell you it does extend to the back of the footway. So what is that attribution that would be useful? So very interesting discussion. Choice of the coordinate referencing system. Previous version allowed both WGS84 GPS style coordinates and also Ordnance Survey grid references. There is a dictum that exists within government projects that say the coordinate referencing system should be British National Grid OSGR. And actually that has a consequence on then how we code the data on the next point, which is in the version that existed in the Alpha, we allowed GeoJSON to be the way you code up spatial coordinates. GeoJSON being very well known in the geospatial industry. Unfortunately, the latest version of GeoJSON, 2016, does not permit use of anything other than WGS84 coordinates, unless you are a closed system where all of the participants in the system agree to do something different. We, by definition, are never going to be a closed system. And therefore, that more or less precludes the use of GeoJSON as an approach. There are plenty of other ways of encoding spatial data. Well-known text is an international standard, is widely adopted. So that would be an obvious preference, but we listen. If there's something where people come back, you, the suppliers and the technicians from the local authorities come back and say, give us something different, then we'll listen. I'm almost done. Linkage to the National Street Gazetteer and to USRNs and ESUs. Okay, message came across very strongly on the 4th of June. Don't force us into a position where we're supplying ESU data, low-level data, elementary street unit data, because that changes and then will create quite a large overhead of maintenance. So we will roll that suggestion back. But there is, again, a government mandate that says we need, because this is a system that's dealing with street-related data, we need to include a linkage to the NSG and to USRNs. And then finally, on data accuracy, again, a very interesting discussion. Very open to suggestions and proposals. I was arguing that perhaps we should be looking at 2 meters absolute, and I heard a cascade of comments come back. Okay, we have to do something. It may be much broader than 2 meters, but we have to do something that stops the whole system falling into disrepute. And so something is needed in that space. Very, very open to hear comments. Next slide, please. And I'm going to hand over to Gabriel.
Yes, thank you, JHB. Hello, everybody. Again, my name is Gabriel. I'm working on PA side. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about API plan development and validation structure. Next slide, please. So how this is going to work from perspective of how we're going to have this implemented. So there is a thing called Apigee, which is a full life cycle API management platform that basically will connect between the TRAs, the Traffic Regulation Authority, and the data consumer. And I assume each TRA will have a DSP, a data service provider that will help the TRA connecting this. And all of this connection, all of this approval and everything will be done on the Apigee, on Google Apigee, which it's a new thing that will have that will be for each TRA, because each TRA will have its own portal that will work, and we will have everything related to the D-TRO that has been issued, and the history and everything that needs to be done. The process will be straightforward because, once the TRA will issue an API key, and that will be used by the DSP, and the DSP will consume the API in a normal way. Also, every time you submit a D-TRO, there'll be a set of rules that applied, and some of the rules John explained earlier, to make sure that the data is valid, the integrity is kept, and also the history is kept, and everything. All of this information will be issued into a interface control document, ICD, that will be released early July. So that is, in a nutshell, that is the plan for the development and validation on the API level. And that's me.
Thanks very much, everyone. That was a great run through the key areas. I've been watching the chat as you've all been talking. If everyone could take a look. Just to say, we'll be trying to answer in this sort of panel Q&A session any key questions. Will also be a transcription that we will use to make sure that we've got down what we said, and we will amalgamate that into the FAQ that is on the D-TRO website, which is via the Transport Technology Forum. So far, questions are mainly centered around dealing with proposals of TROs. So Simon at Buchanan's has asked that said that they have concerns about the practicality of including notification of proposals, and is there a reporting point for proposal abandoned? And then he says that there's a danger the system will get cluttered, and this feeling has been echoed elsewhere within the chat. So perhaps we could just talk through how we see the dealing of proposals in the system.
Yeah.
Who would like to say that one? John. Okay.
I'm happy to do so. So the slide that Lokesh showed you of the reporting points, okay, big asterisks again, subject to what might be in the secondary legislation coming under the new government. There's certainly a viewpoint that comes from the DfT policy side that says it's very useful to have, for permanent TROs, it's very useful to have a point at the point when a consultation is being made that notifies into the central system and therefore will be available for consumption by whoever the data consumers are, indicating those proposals. And it's an interesting point, Simon. Maybe there should be a proposal abandoned option. As I said, things that are time limited, so consultations are by their nature time limited, and I would assume under our regime of data retention, after 90 days or whatever it is, then old ones will simply disappear. They won't be visible anymore. So we won't end up with a huge heap of ancient stuff that's all time expired. Where the question of whether the request to the local authorities to supply that data at the point of initiating a consultation will come up via consultation on the secondary legislation for sure. I would expect the same to be true of any requirements to do with real-time reporting of on-road status of TTROs. It'll be in the consultation for sure. So.
Okay, thanks, John. We will summarise the feelings about proposals, add them into the FAQ as a specific question. Now, there's another question from Eliza at Causeway about what the expectations are for being involved in private beta. And I would just say at this point, I know we have previously said on other calls and areas that we would be releasing like a set of instructions for what the expectations are. I would just have to say that our plans have taken a slight change because of the calling of the election and what can and can't be said. But I would go back to the overarching caveats raised at the start of the meeting about saying that what we have in terms of a timetable is our current plan, but it could change. We know that the next key date for us to make is the publication of the interface control documents in early July, and then the alignment of that to the expectation of a date for going into private beta, and what all the suppliers and others on the call are concerned about is what would the expectation be for your involvement in all of this. I think in broad terms, what we can say is that we are, once we have circulated how you would access the system in the form of the ICDs, we would expect there'd be a time of familiarization for yourselves to get to grips with all that documentation and how you would build a system that could access our system, or how you would configure your current system to do that. And then at some point, we, as we go on, there are two further sessions programmed at the moment for further continuation of the data specification. Perhaps Gareth, you might take that one. I think you've got it on a later slide about those two further sessions. Would you perhaps just care to explain a bit more about what we expect at each stage?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, John. So I think in terms of that expectation for beta, there's kind of three key elements. So one is the user research, which we've been doing, and we've been putting out surveys and getting general feedback across the community. So thanks everyone who's already responded to some of those surveys we put out. The second part is around feedback on some of the technical documentation we put out. And this session today was, we've arranged it directly from feedback that we've received from you, the community, saying we'd really like this session as an introduction, which is a kind of key driver for setting it up. We've got 2 further sessions, technical working group sessions scheduled. So that's for us to get feedback from yourselves on the data specification. So the first one of those is on the 8th of July. So we'd like to get your feedback at that session, as I say. And then we'd like to have a final session, ideally, where we reflect on the feedback we've received and walk through kind of any changes we've made. And that's scheduled for the 8th of August. So they're the key feedback sessions. And then the third element around involvement in private beta will be around testing. And as I said, associated with the interface control documentation, we'll also be releasing a test plan as well. So that'll be the key document, which will outline the kind of testing element that will be proposed for private beta. So they're the key dates for the diaries in terms of feedback that John's put up. I'll just run through those again. So that's the 8th of July for initial consultation on the data spec. We've got the 7th of August to ideally wrap up and kind of show how the feedback's been incorporated. We've got our general next webinar for everyone. That's scheduled for the 28th of July. Our cadence, most people know about, is roughly monthly for the webinars. Obviously, we've got the summer to consider in that. And then once the conference season kicks off again in the autumn, we'll be at HighWiz UK presenting, and we'll be available at that conference, also at the next Transport Technology Forum conference as well. I think that's scheduled for the 14th of November in Birmingham.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. I think obviously what also digital solution providers, data consumers and others are looking for in terms of what the involvement in beta means for them is the periods before and after the rollout of the private beta. I think we can be a bit more specific on, as Gareth said, about what happens before to get us to the private beta rollout. I would just say that the user research phase of the project is in progress. We have completed a round of interviews with traffic regulation authorities. There will be further UR, and we will be reaching out, no doubt, to DSPs and also to data consumers for that user research. So if we get in touch with you, or even if you would like to be involved, please drop us a line at the D-TRO mailbox. As regards what after the launch of private beta means, obviously have to go back again to our caveats about this is the current plan, and could all change if ministers tell us to do something else. But broadly speaking, as you may well have guessed, that we will be looking for TRAs and DSPs to send us their orders in a compliant form via the API service for during the private beta period. There will be iteration on the data model in that phase. We'll be taking further feedback, and we'll be looking to get the service into a state that is suitable, subject again to any changes to the current plan that might affect it for an eventual public beta launch. Hopefully that is specific enough at this stage on what the expectations are for involvement in private beta. We will be checking our notes and everything and making sure that we keep everyone fully informed about what that involves, because we know it's important to you, and we're making a big call on the industry community here to deal with a wholly new service that's coming in, and we know that you are in need of the right level of information. Things will hopefully become a bit more clear as we get past the election, new ministers come in and we get reset in terms of the full scope of everything that's planned. If you've got any other questions on anything, please continue to add them in the chat. We have got a little bit more time. Is there anything else that anyone of us rest of the speakers would like to clarify or add in to the discussion at this point? Are you all okay? Good. I'm not seeing any more questions come up. I would just perhaps I put it in the chat, but I will add in about what's happening with our GitHub. Apologies, some of you may have been rather unceremoniously booted off our GitHub in recent days. We did reach a rather hard limit on the number of simultaneous members of the repo. It does cost money to have licenses on GitHub, even if you're in a government department. We have been talking to the powers that be regarding the centralized licenses and trying to work out a way to go forward. This may or may not be that we move to a public external repo during this phase or private beta. I think the expectation is eventually that we would go to a public beta, a public external repo for GitHub. That may or may not actually make it the same cost to the Department for Transport, and we are somewhat reliant at this stage on the goodwill of our central colleagues to provide us with the necessary licenses. I'm inclined to believe at the moment we've been given a bit more slack, as the number of people has now risen to approximately 50, whereas before we were getting nobody allowed to be added. Just email me or the D-TRO mailbox if you find that you can't get in. We'll try and add you, I think is the message there. There's a question from Joshua Hockridge in the chat. It looks very complicated. Who wants to take it?
Yeah, I'll answer that. Thank you, Joshua. My understanding, if you read the RFC that defines the 2016 version of GeoJSON, is for sure you could try to do what you've done, which is squeezing in British national grids into the GeoJSON structure. And if we were a closed system, we could all agree to do that. But because we are going to have new suppliers coming in, some new authorities, but presumably quite a lot of new data consumers, we're not really a closed system in that respect. And therefore, as an open system, if I read GeoJSON RFC correctly, we can only use WGS84. So I think the answer to your question is no. People could tell me otherwise, but that's the way I read it. So.
Also, John, or anyone else, I don't know if you've seen the comment in that Patrick's put. It's a screenshot of a page from about coordinate referencing systems, talking about WGS and GJ 2008. Is there any comments on that?
It's the same comment. So the earlier version of GeoJSON, the 2008 version, allowed you to pick whatever coordinate referencing system you liked. In reality, they experienced the problem, and they obviously received a fair amount of feedback in their revision and update, where people were using all sorts of different coordinate systems. From a coding viewpoint, it works beautifully. From an interpretation viewpoint, it's a bit of a nightmare. And therefore they've tightened it up considerably, and given the factors that we have to deal with, which include UK government policy, it forces us down a particular route, to be honest.
Thanks, John, for confirming that. It's all very deep and very complex subject, and we are trying to be as accommodating as possible whilst also abiding to the rules, I think would be my summary of that there. I mean, the government's rules on dealing with these things. We've had feedback from many different places on these issues. Just a shout out to the GitHub again about commenting on issues. We did strip out a lot of the content on the GitHub, but we have still in place all the previous issues regarding the data model. I think the ones to concentrate on at the moment, though, there's one on the new data specification and there's one on location referencing. Is that right, John? There's those, yeah. You'll see them as the most recently updated issues. I don't know if there's anything else that anyone's got in order to wrap up. We're nearly at time. I can't see any further questions. Just to say thank you so much for coming to this meeting. We are using, I just wanted to ask to say at this point, we are using a slightly different variant of a webinar in Teams. I might just ask a couple of you after the event how you thought it went and what the user experience was like. We want to be providing the best possible type of webinar whilst also making it easy for us to organize. This is a hybrid version of a Teams webinar. It's something that we can set up ourselves. So if I were to drop a couple of you a short message afterwards, just be ready to let me know what you think and how it went. We will be organising those two other technical sessions at least, probably using this method if it has been received well and it works. We'll also be reviewing the video and see what that looks like, and then publishing on the YouTube that we mentioned. All right, okay, I think that is just about all we've got time for. Thanks to all our speakers, very good show. Thanks to everyone for attending and the questions in the chat. We will be getting back to you with some updates and keep you up to date with the latest news. Webinar 3 will be announced very soon. Okay, that's all from us. Just about still good morning and have a good afternoon. We'll see you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.